Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Kat Dunkle, and she has a very interesting near-death experience to share with us today. Hi, Kat.
Hi, Peggy.
So you can start wherever you like and take as long as you like. I'm going to flip the switch here. You'll be seeing me, but what we're recording will be you. And then I'll come back on like we are now in a little bit, and we'll have conversation. Is that
Great.
okay?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay.
Well, I grew up in a family that with two alcoholic parents. Things were pretty dysfunctional, and I think a lot of us can say that. Hopefully, not too many, but I grew up very insecure. My father was transferred all over the United States with his job. He's with the Department of Agriculture and the government. And so I was always going into new schools and with different curriculum where I really couldn't learn. They would tell me just to sit in class and they would pass me through. So I was very insecure. I didn't really believe in God as a child. I think all children naturally want to believe in God, and I did. As I grew into my teens, I became very rebellious because of the circumstances where I grew up. Um, and I started searching. I had a friend that died, and he was in a car accident, and I went to his funeral, and I just looked at this wax doll down there and I thought to myself, where did he go? Is there life after death? Is there really God? Is there anything in this earth other than just nothingness, maybe? And I started questioning and started searching. I asked, went to every church I could imagine, couldn't find any answers, went to anything that could give me any answers, any hope, but there was nothing out there. So I guess I would say I was an agnostic at that point. Later on in life, I went through a series of very difficult situations, a bad marriage, again, to an alcoholic. I think kids growing up in that atmosphere tend to, that's normal to them.
Yeah.
Got out of that with two small babies and a nervous breakdown, moved from Kansas City. I remember being in Kansas City the last few nights I was there, looking up at the sky and saying, God, if you're really up there, if you just give me 1 year of knowing what it's like to really feel true love, have somebody love me and let me feel the feeling of love, because I don't think I've ever felt that way towards anyone. But I just walked away because I knew God didn't really exist. I hopped in an old beat up car that we had and took my two little baby sons, and we left Kansas City and drove to Seattle. I ended up in government housing, which was awful. We didn't have any furniture. We didn't have any food to eat. We had a little gas stove that heated our unit, and we pretend like we were camping. And the little pilot light was our campfire, and the boys loved that. We'd run through the house, playing games because we couldn't break anything, no furniture or anything. We went to the library and got books and read. And quite frankly, I loved my life at that point because it was away from all the hectic, horrible things that I had left in Kansas City. So at work, I did get a job. I started working in a car dealership, and a lady there one day told me that she'd met the man that I was going to marry. And oh, no, no, not me. That's never going to happen again. And my experience with that wasn't good. And I don't even want to hear about it. But this guy called me, this man named Don called me that night and asked me out. And 28 days later, we were married in Reno, Nevada. And I never have met anybody in my life like this man. He was very good looking. He owned his own home. He owned a car. He had a good job. The handsomest man I'd ever encountered in my life. I just couldn't figure out what in the world did he want with me. And so, I thought, well, whatever. It was wonderful. My boys had a daddy, and life was really good. I'd open up closets, and there'd be china and crystal there that he had got when he was in the Navy, and just amazing things. I'd wake up at night and poke him and see if he was even real. It was amazing. So on our first anniversary, prior to that, about 6 months into this, he went and bought a tavern with a friend of his, and I was opposed to it because of the alcohol aspect not being good with me in my life, but it was his dream, and he wanted to own his own business. And we're kids in our 20s at that point and knew nothing about running a business. But he had a partner that seemed pretty savvy, and his wife did the bookkeeping. Well, that business really started going downhill and creating some problems. On our first anniversary, we went out to dinner and had a great time. And he mentioned, let's just stop by the tavern on our way home to see how things are going. And we did. And I went in, I was sitting back in the corner, and everybody was congratulating him on the new business and what a success it was. And there was this particular barmaid that would go over and flicking her hair towards him, and he was fixing her necklace and flirting with him, obviously, and he seemed to be eating it up. And I was just like getting angrier and angrier. And pretty soon I just got up and just ran out the door, just so frustrated. And that's what I always did when I was backed into a corner. I would just run like some scared animal. But anyway, that night we got in this horrendous fight when I got home, and it was just awful. And it had been exactly 1 year to the very day, because we only knew each other 28 days, and that was in February. So it was exactly 1 year to the date. That vow I made to God, let me have 1 year. Not long
You
after
should have asked
that.
for 50, huh?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was not long after that my father dropped dead of a heart attack. We started bankruptcy proceedings in our business at the tavern, and then my little son Mark was hit by a car and killed. And I'm so sorry.
Who was?
He was hit by a car and killed. And
Who was though?
pardon?
Who was hit and killed?
That was my youngest son, Mark. And
Oh.
I had the two boys when Don and I were married. So, I never really worked at the tavern except for on Monday nights. And I had that night, because the boys, good night, on Monday nights, we had a big crab feed, of a promotional thing. And I went into work that night, and Don was talking on the phone very intently. And I couldn't understand why he was doing that. But he hung up and came over and grabbed my arm, was pulling me out the door, and told me that Mark had been hit by a car. And we got to the hospital as the ambulance was pulling in, and the doctor came running out and asked, how did this happen? And I don't know. I just left them with a babysitter, and we went into the waiting room hour after hour, waiting, just knowing he would be okay. There was no other option that he would be okay. But we went through the night, and in the morning I was looking out the window of the hospital, and I saw cars going by and people waking up. The new morning, a new day was starting for them. I thought, how could that possibly be, with
Right.
babies being born here and in this hospital, and children fighting for their lives. And
When your whole world just stopped, I'm sure.
yeah, it did. It was horrible. It was horrible. And then I heard these footsteps coming down the hall as we were looking out the window, and I knew what was going to happen. I knew what the doctor was going to say. And he said that they had tried, but they couldn't save Mark. And we went into his room, and he was so cold. And I leaned down to kiss him, and saw a tear in his eye, and said, "Don't cry, Mark. His mommy's here," pulling the covers up over him. As if mommy's gonna make everything right. I can make it okay, right? But I couldn't. And I just then kind of collapsed. And when we got home, I had to tell his brother Chris what had happened. And Chris had come running up to me and said, "Mommy, did you hear what happened to Marky?" And his poor Chris had been there with him when the accident happened, saw the whole thing, and was just left there to go home and tell the babysitter what had happened. And so the trauma on him was absolutely horrible. And so our lives obviously dramatically changed. I couldn't even leave the house. I couldn't smile. I felt the horrible guilt of losing a child. And it was a very, very bad time. But Dawn told me, you have to get out of this house. You can't just sit here. This is probably several weeks afterwards, but I just couldn't. I would sit there just trying to get through one more day. And he just kind of insisted that we were going to go over to these friends that were having a party that night. Well, I can't smile. I can't talk to people. I don't want to go. So we were arguing. And then by the time we got out the car, we were arguing even more. I got into the car, we were full out yelling at each other. And Don made the statement. He said, "You've just got to move on." And I came over at him just with all my force, just beating him in the face, saying, "I'll never move on. I will never move on. I can't." And was smashing him. He's trying to drive the car and push me off. And he took his arm and swung and to push me over to my side. And he hit me in the back of the back, kind of the side, and in such a way that it actually lacerated my liver. There's a balloon.
Oh my goodness.
a sac that around your liver that holds your liver to peace. It's like Jello, or your liver,
Oh,
the sac protects it. So I had massive internal bleeding, but I
jeez.
didn't know it. And so we were in the car, and I just said, take me home, which he did. And again, I grabbed the car keys and started to run because that's what I always did. And I was driving the car, pouring down rain, and this pain inside of me started really getting bad. And I stopped the car and got out. It's pouring down rain, and I'm all wet, and cars are honking at me as I got back in the car. And I didn't know how I got home. Absolutely, I undid all my clothes. So here I am, soaking wet, my clothes all undone, kind of crawling up the driveway, trying to get into the house. And Don's standing there, so furious with me. And he said, what's wrong? What are you trying to do? And I said, I'm trying to call an ambulance. I got to get to the hospital. Something's really wrong with me. And he said, well, if you're that bad, I'll take you, which he did. In the hospital, I'm in the room, and they're back in the late 60s. They didn't have MRIs or CAT scans to tell what was wrong with me, but they could tell that I guess my blood pressure or my blood count was dropping very drastically. So the doctors came in and said, we have to take you into surgery right away. You're losing blood internally. We don't know how, but we've got to find out. And so, I mean, at that point, you don't have any choice. Who is this doctor? I don't even know you. And it happened so fast. But so on the gurney, they're taking me down the hallway, and Don kissed me goodbye and said that he loved me. And I clung to that because I didn't think he even liked me, let alone loved me at this point. And our last time together had been so awful. So when I went into surgery, they put the mask over my face, and I knew that I should be going under, but I didn't. Everything was dark, but I couldn't breathe, and I was struggling, and I couldn't get my arms up. They had me secured on the table for surgery. I couldn't get my arms up to pull the mask off my face, but I was suffocating, and I was in a panic, just a horrible panic inside of me. I've got to breathe. I've got to breathe. And then I started going through whatever the darkness was and coming out in a different place. And it was a tunnel, I guess. Other people have described it as a tunnel, so I'll call it that. That's what it looked like. And I didn't have to breathe anymore. That panic left me. It was strange still because I still wanted to breathe, but I didn't have to. And then I started moving forward, and I saw my husband Don down below with a street lamp down there, and my two other sons were there with him. And they were crying, and I wanted to tell them, no, don't cry. I'm okay. I'm fine. And I kept it, and I just knew at that point they were going to be just fine. So I started moving forward again, and I saw four people dressed in street clothes standing off to the left of me. And I don't know who they were. I mean, my son had died, and he wasn't there. I've heard, people you come and see, you come and greet you, but they had these very concerned looks on their faces. And they weren't joyful or happy, or they just looked very like they were really worried for me. And I don't know, maybe they were distant relatives or whatever. I don't know, but just four human beings, not angels or anything. And I went by them, and I was curious at this point. I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel real peaceful. I didn't feel much of anything. And then this thought came to me, there is no God. Now, at this point in my life, I was a total atheist. When my son was hit by a car, people would come to me and say, oh, he's with Jesus, and I would just scream at them, what does your God need with my son? And just, I was so angry. If God did exist, I hated him. I hated him. Why could he let this happen? And all the horrible things you see on earth. How could that possibly happen if there's this good, just God? So I was definitely at this point in my life an atheist. I had tried to believe in God. No one could ever give me an ounce of hope, nothing. So my anger and my bitterness that I had put God down. I'd blasphemed him so badly before all this happened. I hated God. If he did exist, which I did not believe he did. I really didn't. So this thought comes to me at this point, there is a God. And I heard this horrendous noise, like a freight train noise that was right next to me and just vibrating me, the loud noise, and then this pulling through my chest of like a rope going 100 miles an hour, and then it just stopped, and I knew that God did exist. And I can't explain to you how strongly I knew that. And I knew that I knew that I knew God existed, and the excitement, because I don't know, that's so weird, because like my hand is right in front of my face right now. Nobody's going to convince me that my hand isn't right there. I see it. I know it's there. That's how much I knew God existed, even more than that. And then once again, I started moving forward, and I saw this brilliance, this huge, brilliant light, and it had something holding it back. And I wasn't there, but I knew that noise came again, and that pulling through my chest. I can only think that maybe that was God just pulling all this garbage out of me, pulling all the hatred and the anger and the horrendous things that I've been through just coming out of me. I don't know, but this noise again and the pulling of the rope through the middle of me. And I knew that I was going to heaven, and the excitement and the peace, all this stuff that nobody can really, there aren't words to explain what this feeling is like. So I can't, I won't even really try, but I knew I was going to heaven, and I was the excitement and the joy and the ecstatic feeling. This, oh, it was incredible. And then the floor dropped out, and I started falling into this darkness, and I knew I was in hell. And I was screaming out, God, I believe in you now. I know that you exist. I believe in you. But I knew that it was too late. I knew that God didn't send me there. I knew that I had done this myself, that I hated him. I didn't want any part of God. And so now I was separated from God, and in this place of horror. It was just this feeling that you can't, nobody can save you, almost like God didn't even know I was there. I would fall and burn in this horrendous place forever and ever. I would never be able to commit suicide. Nobody could save me. Nobody, I didn't exist. I didn't exist in the eyes of God or anybody. And then it just all stopped. Like I say, I was screaming, I believe in you, God. I believe in you. Please save me from this place. And it just stopped. And I started spiraling backwards, back into the tunnel, going backwards to the entrance of it. And then I felt this a spirit, or I call it the will to live, enter back into my body. So at this point, there's this place of being with God in heaven, which was incredible, or coming back into life. As long as that spirit was apart from me, I wanted to be with God in heaven. But as that entered back into my body, my physical body entered into my body, the spirit of God, or me, I'm not making sense. I'm like, am I making any sense? But this came into me, and I, at that point, wanted to live. I heard an audible voice, and I believe it was a voice of God, say, bring people to me. And then I was back in the operating room screaming, God's real, God is real. I died. And then they wheeled me in, I had machines and wires coming out from every part of my body. And obviously my time after that was really a long time of healing and horrendously tough things. But that was over 50 years ago. And I have, ever since that day, done nothing but try to bring people to the Lord. And I evangelized. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was an atheist. How do I bring people to God? How do I do that? So I would tell people what happened to me, and I didn't bring them to God. I just scared them to death. I didn't know what to do, but I started going to these different churches, or trying anywhere I could learn about God, and tried reading the Bible, but I didn't know, why did they have the New Testament? Wasn't the Old Testament good enough? All weird stuff to me, and hard and difficult. But I pressed on, and like I say, for 50 years, that's all I have done. That's been my life. My goal in life is to do what I feel God led me to do, and that was to bring people to Him. So that's my story.
It makes me think of that, was it Barbara Mandrell song, I was country before country was cool, and you're like NDE before NDE was heard of. I mean, it's 50 years ago. That's That's a long time. I mean, I'm sure you didn't know that that was a near-death experience
No,
at that
no,
time.
back, yeah. I think back in the 60s was about when they started being able to resuscitate people. And so there was a rash of near-death experiences during that time. There's
Okay.
people that are my age that are coming out with stories. And, maybe they happened before that, but nobody ever talked about it. I never had heard about anything like that.
Do you
And
remember when you started hearing that this happened to other people?
well, I got involved with Dr. Bruce Grayson. I don't know if you know who he is or
Yes.
not.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's a scientist at the University of Virginia, or was. He's retired now, but he got a hold of me, and I'm not sure exactly how we met, or we didn't meet, but it was on I think over the phone at that time. And he started interviewing me and interviewed me for over 20 years, giving me all these tests and in
Hmm.
and out things. And we became really good friends. He believes my story is real. He put my story in his book, Alive. I think it was just published a few months back. And he's just a fantastic guy, not a believer in God at that time. I don't know if he is now or not,
No.
anyway, yeah, so that's, yeah. No, there, I had not heard a lot about these things, but through him and some other people started learning.
That amazes me, people that study these experiences and still don't believe in God.
Well, he's a scientist, and scientists are always going to find a reason for everything, but I don't think he's been able to do that.
Right.
I
What
don't
other
know.
explanation are you going to find?
Right, right. I mean, there just is no other explanation for how all this can be. And so I know, and I know what it's done for me. I mean, I was a changed person overnight. And my husband, I mean, he was elated. He even went for the church deal, so it was like amazing transformation. That doesn't happen to people. I mean, maybe over time or counseling or all sorts of things, people can change, but to change that drastically overnight and not change for over 50 years, not one little bit, that doesn't happen. And
Yeah.
I went to bed after this happened. I could say we were bankrupt, very, very poor. Again, no food to eat, whatever. But I went to bed one night and I dreamt of starting this business. I believe it came from God. I really do. That was a dream. My experience of knowing God was definitely not a dream. I asked Dr. Grayson about that. Could this have been some kind of hallucination from the anesthetic and things? And he said, absolutely not. And he explains it in a scientific way, which I can't
Uh-huh.
do, but it was not a hallucination. It was not a dream. But I did have this dream of starting this business, which I did. And it became very successful. I was still in business today and run by my son, but we gained great financial success with that. And I believe it was God's gift to me, but just things changed. I have a great awareness now for hurting people. I can walk by them and know that there's pain in them, and maybe by the looks on their faces, and maybe everybody can do that. But I seem to be very sensitive to anyone that's in pain or and wanting to talk to them, and will stop people and ask them, "Are you okay?"
Were
And
you able to mend that marriage?
pardon.
Were you able to repair that marriage?
Oh yeah, we've been married
Oh,
54 years now.
oh, awesome. I love
Yeah,
that.
he's a great guy and always was, but he went through, losing a business and losing all of his men, or their egos are huge, and he went through an awful lot and also felt responsible for what happened to me. But I think he was just a player in the big scheme of things. So, he's not abusive, but he was that night. So,
This is just hit you just wrong, and with you attacking him and in the car and
yeah.
yeah.
I
That's
was the one that
awesome.
was abusing him. Actually, he was trying to drive the car, and I went coming at him. I'll never change. I'll never stop. So yeah, he's a great guy.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
So have you been sharing your story very much?
Yes, I want to, because especially I'm so appreciative of you for having this, Peggy, because it does give me the opportunity to tell my story. It does create curiosity in some people maybe that don't believe in God or trying to. And I did write my story in a book. I don't do that for gain. Obviously, I don't need financial anything. I don't need success. I've had that through the business world, and I write it for one reason, and that's to put something in someone's hands to give them hope when they are hopeless and in pain. And so, yes, I appreciate the opportunity, and I do speak as often as I can.
What's the name of your book? I wrote it down here somewhere.
It's Safe to Die. It's on Amazon. Just
Oh,
came out
okay.
on Amazon. There's a picture of it,
Oh,
but
that's pretty.
it's called "Is It Safe to Die?" And obviously it can be.
Where did you get the title?
I don't know. I wrote this story down years ago and had that in the book. It was in one of the chapters was called "Is It Safe to Die?" And so that's actually where I took that name from for the book. So this one I had professionally done and edited and everything. So the other one I was just a self-published thing that I just wanted to get down so I wouldn't forget anything. But obviously I haven't forgotten anything. How can you forget that? So yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
So after you've self-published a book, like you can go get another publisher later and say like rewrite this or something? I'm curious
Well,
about that.
yeah, I self-published, but it's really expensive to do. And for people that want to write their stories or have, things similar to mine, Amazon's made it really convenient. It's like self-publishing, but it's called KDP publishing through Amazon, and it's not that expensive. And it was expensive to have it edited and all that, but they can publish their books or their stories through that, and it's a much easier way to go. So that's what I did with this one. It's a
So do you do your own marketing or you just let it go?
The marketing I do is talking to
Okay.
people. Yeah, word of mouth and
Yeah.
and talking to people, being willing to get up in front of people and speak at ladies' luncheons or podcasts like this, or whatever chance or opportunity God opens up for me. So
Have you been involved with IONS, the
yes,
conferences?
I've been involved with IANS for probably 20 years up in Seattle with Kimberly Clark Sharp started that, and she was one of the originators of IANS, and Dr. Grayson as well. And she had a near-death experience. Just she's a wonderful person, just a great person. So IANS is a great group. They believe in everything, everything. You don't come in there trying to proselytize God or anybody, because there's a lot of people that believe in other sources. So, but they're open to everyone, and it's a great,
That's
great
good.
position.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you'd like to add? I'll put
No,
you on the screen with you.
yeah, no,
So
that's
I'm so happy to hear that you're still with your husband. I thought like that was it, like you got your year.
that guy's gone too. No, he's here.
And it's comforting to know that someone that was atheist, like you just got to cry out to God. I mean, we hear that quite a bit, like Howard Storm, just say, Jesus save me or whatever. And
Yeah,
it's not that hard, it seems. Maybe some will never, humble themselves to say that, or they're so
yeah.
angry and bitter. I don't know. But it seems like if they ask for it, it's right there.
It is, and I feel that God's no respecter of persons. It says that in the Bible that God doesn't love one person over another. So He would not just give this gift to me. I believe everybody has the opportunity during the dying process to make that choice to go follow God or not. And so people may have died bitter atheists, angry, nasty people, and had this transformation, not when they're dead, but during the dying process, that God will come to them. I believe that firmly, because I know too many good people that just couldn't believe in God for one reason or another. But I wouldn't count on that. And that's why I say, is it safe to die? If you want to feel like you're safe and know that you're there, then you want to lay your life down. You just want to say, God, I've made a mess of this life. I want you to take it over. I believe in you and I give my life to you. And that's what I did on a cold church floor one time and just crying out. I just, and that's all it took. And it's easy and it's worth a try. If you're out there suffering, if you're out there struggling, why? You don't have to. You don't have to.
Yeah. Years ago, one day on the radio, I had a Christian channel, I think, and I heard him say, and I stopped in my tracks and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. It was some Bible verse about more angels rejoice when one sinner repents than when a
Yeah.
thousand righteous, something like that. And I thought, wow. And it just like stuck with me and stuck with me. That's so beautiful. And then I later on the day I started watching Little House on the Prairie, and that exact same Bible quote was on Little House on the Prairie. And I've watched Little House on the Prairie a lot and never heard that. And I thought that is going to stick with me. And it has, because you just imagine, this, people, Christians think, oh, I do all these right things and God's just going to love me best. We just did like
Yeah.
think like that.
Yeah.
And then we realize how joyful the angels in heaven, I mean, 1,000 angels to celebrate when one sinner repents. And I don't mean sinners, but like atheists or, anybody that comes home. And, it kind of makes you think of was it prodigal son or something, like you have this one, you have all these children, everything's great, but they're, mother's heart, there's always that one child. They're not here. They're
Yeah.
not here. Maybe like your son, the day you see him, it's like how rejoicing, like you love your other sons, that's great. But when you see that one that's been separated from you, how that feeling's going to be, and it's like what I think of is that must be
Yeah.
so wonderful.
That's a great analogy. As I had that situation with my son that was with his brother when he was killed. He went into drugs and horrible things in his life, and he was so traumatized by that situation that it was awful. And he eventually had enough. I mean, we ended up having to make him leave our home at, I think he was close to 17, and told him we have rules in our home. You can't do drugs, you can't do this, you have to live by these rules. This is our home. We're paying for it here. If you want to live here, we want you, but you got to do this. Well, he said, no, I'm going to leave. And he left. And it broke my heart. I couldn't stand to lose another son, but he left. And I think in about a year, almost quite a year, he came back and he said, I want to live under your rules. We
Oh,
said, fine, but none of them have changed. And he said, I want to go into the Navy. So he did for 6 years. He came out of the Navy and gave his life to the Lord, and he is a strong Christian. He ministers to street people. He goes out at night and finds street people, and
oh
he
my
tells them about
goodness.
his life and what happened to him, and he's got the long hair. He looks great. He's so cute. I love him to
Do you
pieces.
think he'd want to come on my show? And we'd love to hear what he has to
You
say.
know, he might do that, Peggy. He's a biker dude, but he's
Yeah, that'd be
hardcore, but
awesome.
he was a one percenter at one time. I mean, he was a bad boy, and but anyway, now converted to loving the Lord, and yes, I think he might do that. He'd be
I
scared
would
to
love
death, but
that.
he might do that.
Oh, I'd love it. Well, you see what it's like, when we're recording, you're in your living room, I'm in mine. It's just us girls talking, and then
Yeah,
you put it on air and it's like done. It's not like it's live or there's this big audience staring at you. It's like I would never, like I could like go in a room and tell my NDE if I'm just the one talking, but like to like mix and mingle or that live stuff and there's other people in the group on the online thing, that makes me so nervous. But this is just like us girls talking.
yeah. I'll bet a lot of people could relate to his story too. I mean, he was
Yeah.
so traumatized as a kid, and I don't know if that comes into his story or if he even knows that, that that's what precipitated him being this bad boy, but it did. And but like I say, he was in biker, the Hell's Angels. I don't know who he was with, but now he's actually gone into those camps. They accept him in there. He goes in and tells them about God, and he tells them about how his life has changed, and he goes in there and prays over people that are sick or all sorts of things, and so because he can get in the door. And yeah, I'd love for him to at least talk to you. Would that be okay? Just have him
Yeah,
come.
sure. Our youngest adopted son is in a really bad place, like for 10 years he's been so angry since he turned 18. He's so angry. And then he's got into drugs and his wife got into drugs and all this bad stuff. And he's just like headed for prison. And so, there's people like that we could hear, maybe not hear what I have to say because I'm this grandma, but somebody like him and some other people like that, I think can reach people that we couldn't.
Right, absolutely. I would love that. And it might just kick him in the back to tell him to do this, to do it. Yay.
Let him watch this, see what he thinks.
That's great.
Okay. So is there anything else you'd like to add or we didn't get to cover? Or?
No, I think that's good. I think that's good. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you.
Well, you did great. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank
And
you.
it's nice meeting you.
Thank you, Peggy. I'll have him get a hold. His name is Chris.
Okay.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.